to Relationship Helpers. I am your host, Vincent, and this is my wife, Laura Ketchy.
Hello.
We are therapists. We do marriage counseling, individual counseling at Christian Counselors of Mooresville. Each week, our podcast aims at helping those struggling with relationship and personal issues. For the last, this is the 6th episode, but for the last 5 episodes, we have been talking about anger and marriage, specifically about communication and how we get these anger distortions and how they cause us to have this kind of rift between ourselves and our spouse. And we've just been diving deeper into that, trying to understand what's going on and how to make that better, alleviate that. We'll just kind of go over the episodes there. Laura, the first one we went over, how to avoid the blame game.
Right, we took a look at how we can be more responsible in our marriages by stopping the blame game.
And then our second episode, we talked about, do you magnify the problems in your marriage? And we looked into maybe subtle ways that we do that we magnify those problems and how damaging, that can be. The third episode was called What You Call Your Spouse. And in this episode, we talked about this kind of labeling. So in that episode, we talked about labeling and how that can really damage a marriage. In our fourth episode, it was entitled, Do You Read Your Spouse's Mind? And in this episode, this is where we kind of dove into this mind reading, where many times the other spouse maybe is not giving us enough details, or maybe we're not asking, and then what happens is we begin to read that spouse's mind, and many times it's wrong. The fifth episode was entitled, Is Complaining Ruining Your Marriage? This is where we looked at how we many times will overgeneralize things in our marriage and come up with these more extreme type statements, or at least where it's a negative spin on things, and instead of looking at just what happened in maybe a specific circumstance. Now, this episode, we take on one of the most common complaints we see in marriage counseling. It's selfishness. Usually by the time we see a couple for marriage counseling and the complaint of selfishness is the issue, the couple has been together quite a while. Usually some act of selfishness is the final straw that brings the couple into counseling. That's kind of put them there. This selfishness comes across as being, at least with their communication, being demanding or commanding with their needs, wants, or values. When the other spouse does not have that same value or that same need, then they get angry, and then they push their agenda onto the other by demanding and commanding. These selfish acts some of the selfish acts can be obvious, such as demanding sex at a certain time, but it can also be more subtle. It could be the things that you do out of fear that keep you from having a healthy relationship, or negative coping mechanisms can be selfish, and independent behavior can be selfish.
I think it's going to be important that we take a look at the more subtle ways selfishness impacts marriage. In other episodes, we've talked about more obvious things, I think. I mean, we're looking at things like affairs and things of that matter. But I think the more subtle forms are kind of the more insidious things, and they can lead to things like affairs.
Right.
But I hope that today's episode does a good job of kind of turning the light on the dark areas in your life.
Well, or the things that kind of build up. They accumulate, these subtle things, and if they're not taken care of, could, as you were saying, maybe lead to these less subtle things like affairs.
Right. So I think it would be good to take a look at something that isn't on a lot of people's radars, which is when selfishness is disguised as selflessness. And one of the ways this really crops up, since we're Christian marriage counselors, we see this. It's when a spouse or spouses are overly involved in their churches to a capacity where it's actually damaging their marital relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they are giving too much of their time and their energy into their church or maybe their community or maybe their soccer team. I can put that
Right.
out there too.
Right. And one of the first problems here is poor boundaries.
Right.
So let's take a look at how this apparent selflessness ends up being selfish due to poor boundaries. Let's come up with some examples for our listeners. Okay, so one such thing could be during the meet and greet time during church, where everybody's, kind of saying hello and maybe a hug lingers a little too long or...
Right, so I've had this become problems for couples as, yes, it may be at the meet and greet time or it may just be at social outings, fellowships, or so forth, where one of the spouses is overstepping that boundary, that physical boundary, where it's not overt, but they may be too touchy-feel. I don't know. Well, yeah, they may have too much of a lingering hug or where they're hugging everyone.
Or seem like they enjoy it a little too much.
Right.
Being in close physical proximity to people of the opposite sex.
Yes.
In front of their spouse or outside of the view of the spouse, whichever the case, the
Right.
offended spouse is hurt by this.
Yeah, the offended spouse is hurt by it, and then it's in a church setting, and maybe even the opposite sex, they feel uncomfortable as well, especially if they're married, or it can create an uncomfortable circumstance for both.
Right.
Some other ways, of course, is the volunteering, maybe teaching Sunday school, but on top of that, you're doing the ushering, and then on top of that, you are leading the Boy Scouts, or you're doing youth in the evening as well.
So your calendar is full of activities away from your spouse.
And then you're on all these committees. You're a trustee, you're deacon, or you're etc. Or you're in the band.
So this person, this person could possibly be what we call a yes man, someone that is a people pleaser and has an inability to say no.
Right. They're in too many activities, and this is actually taking away from their family.
So it's really sacrificing time that may need to be spent in leadership of your family.
Right.
Rather than leading other people.
Mm-hmm. So the healthy way to handle this is when someone asks you at church, can you teach this class, or can you usher, or can you help with communion, or can you be a volunteer at Vacation Bible School, or can you help with the youth or go on the trip with them, or can you serve on this committee? Before giving an answer, say, I'm not sure about that. Let me talk to my wife and see what my commitments are, and then I'll get back to you.
Right. Never feel like you're put on the spot to have to answer it right away.
Yes. So that's one thing, is the being prepared for those questions or those requests, I guess, because it happens, because they know you're a good person and you're capable. And it's not that you're not capable for anything. I mean, you're capable to do all of those things. It's just, is the timing right? Is this the right time for you to serve in that capacity? And, saying that you need to talk to your spouse, that's healthy. Saying you need to pray about it, that's healthy, because
Right.
timing is very important.
Yeah, it could be something like, let me check on it. I'll get back with you by such and such date.
Right.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that some people may be kind of shocked that we started with the topic of selflessness being disguised as selfishness. I keep saying this backwards. Selfishness being disguised as selflessness. I think it's going to be important that you, instead of saying yes all the time to all these requests, actually saying yes to your marriage.
Right. If you're struggling because you are a yes man, otherwise known as the people pleaser, as Laura had said before, it is important to understand that this behavior may make you look good to other people, which very well could be stroking your ego and pride, but it doesn't really help your family. What seems to be selfless acts by outsiders could be destroying your marriage. Here's some instances for men, just to kind of put a little bit more meat to it and get you thinking on it. For men, this may come in the form of helping repair someone's car, let's say a neighbor's or I don't know, a widow at the church or something like that, or fixing a plumbing issue at someone's house, when really there are needed repairs at your house for your family. So this may be men doing this instead of taking care of the things that need to be taken care of at home. For women, this may take the form of, let's say, taking care of someone's child. Maybe this could be a neighbor's or family members. When your children or your husband really are not getting the proper amount of quality time with you.
So this person may be avoiding conflict with other people by saying yes all the time.
Right.
Meanwhile, they're kind of throwing their own family under the bus.
Correct. They're not taking care of their family. In both instances, they are putting their neighbors, their church family, or their family, maybe their brothers and sisters or cousins or whoever, above their wife and their own children.
So it's really important to prioritize your marriage and family. And you may have to have conversations with those who approach you for commitments and explain that you can't be involved this time. So being able to say no is actually a skill.
It is. And for those who struggle with it, as I was mentioning before, I feel like you need to be very intentional with it. And this is something you need to think about beforehand. If you struggle with it, think about what you're going to say, how you're going to say it. Go ahead and have that prepared in your mind so that you don't do that. It's really a negative coping mechanism that you don't do that gut reaction of yes. Well, some people, that's their habit. Their habit is to say yes. Looking, and this kind of goes along with the Bible here. This is Paul talking to Timothy. So if you're a leader in the church, this is what 1 Timothy 3, 1 through 5 says. It says, here is a trustworthy saying, whoever aspires to be an overseer desires a noble task. Now the overseer is to be above reproach, faithful to his wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not given to drunkenness, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own family well, and see that his children obey him, and he must do so in a manner worthy of full respect.
So if anyone does not know how to manage his own family, how can he take care of God's church?
Yeah, so Paul really here is saying, you got to take care of your own family first. If you're struggling with that, you don't need anything else on your plate. You've got to take care of that. You've got to figure out how to manage your own family first. Take care of your own family's needs, your children's needs, your spouse's needs, before you should even consider volunteering or helping.
Taking on leadership.
These other positions. I mean, that's basically what Paul's saying. He's saying, fix yourself, work on yourself. Of course, in the first part, he talks about being disciplined. And a lot of those is talking about being disciplined.
It's a lot of self-discipline.
A lot of self-discipline, yes.
Yes.
And being able to say no is self-discipline.
Yeah, it could be a form of self-control, because if you're dealing with pride issues, then being able to, let me rephrase that. If your pride is part of the reason why you continue to say yes to these commitments, then it will be an act of self-control to say no to some things that are offered your way.
Right, and that will definitely be out of your comfort zone. So when really that saying no, although it doesn't seem, this may seem counterintuitive when you think about growing your faith, but actually that saying no can be a way of growing your faith. You're going out of your comfort zone, doing something that you wouldn't normally do, even though it's saying no to helping with Vacation Bible School or whatever it may be, or some kind of volunteering.
And if your heart wasn't really coming at it from, God's leading to begin with, if it was a selfish kind of ego-driven thing to begin with, then that's not good.
Yeah, it's not healthy, because God wants you to be serving
with a servant's heart.
Through Him.
Yeah.
Right. A servant's heart through Him. He wants to work through you. If you're not allowing Him to work through you, and you're just doing it out of guilt, then God doesn't want that. He doesn't need that.
Yeah, it's kind of like usurping God. It's kind of like putting yourself up there higher than God. I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. I can do it myself. I can do it myself. I can do it myself. Okay, so we've looked at how selfishness can be disguised as selflessness. Let's look at a few other subtle forms that selfishness creeps into marriages and conflict. I know one that presents itself in counseling often is finances.
Right.
Forms of being fiscally irresponsible. Would you care to elaborate?
Well, it's hard for me to say physically. I say physically instead of fiscally. I was struggling with that the other day, but I'll try to. So it could mean in this, it can mean different things for a man and different things for a woman. Many times I'll find when this is a struggle in marriage, it's the women, for the women, they're struggling with spending. And what I mean, making a lot of these seemingly small purchases. And what I mean small purchases, like less than $200 or less than $100. So you're not agreeing.
I think you're overgeneralizing because I've seen it flip. I have seen the men being the ones out buying the boats and the large equipment.
No, you're not. Okay, let me finish.
Okay.
So what I'm seeing is, for the women, it's a lot of these seemingly, I say, smaller purchases, less than $200 or less than $100 purchase per time. So it may be going out and buying a new outfit,
new purse, new purse and shoes,
right? Every week or every other week, or going to the spa too often,
or can't wear the same outfit twice, kind of deal.
Right. It may be these small things that accumulate to become a large amount. That's where the women may be struggling with a lot of these smaller things, and they're hiding it from their husband, not really telling them about these smaller expenditures that really add up. Then on the flip side, the men, they're over here making these many times much larger purchases. Yeah, like a boat or an ATV or a new car or not a Winnebago, but a camper. They're making these few $1,000 purchases, $10,000. They just bought a shed or outbuilding without discussing it with their wife. They're making, many times the men seem to be making these much larger purchases, I guess, without discussing it with the wife. Now, they may discuss some of these smaller things, but they don't discuss these huge purchases. And on the opposite end, you've got the women. They're not discussing all these seemingly smaller purchases, a new outfit, new bathing suit, new that. They're not really discussing these smaller purchases with the men, but they do discuss the bigger purchases. Does that make sense?
It does. So, in essence, what happens is no one has a firm grasp of where the family's finances are, where they stand, because of these secretive, independent actions.
It is. These are secretive, independent actions when they're not going to their spouse and saying, hey, let's sit down here. Would this be a good idea? Or should we wait? Is the timing right? They're not talking about their family's budget, their family's needs, their family's goals that they want with their finances.
So if you're spending money, you should be a part of the collaborative effort to budget every month.
Right. And this doesn't always mean that you're sitting down looking at all these numbers, but you're definitely talking about it. And you have an open dialogue with your spouse about your purchases, about what's going on.
All right. So it's not just a matter of what you buy or don't buy. It's also a matter of not turning a blind eye to finances too.
Right. Yes. It's not totally ignoring them, but be willing to talk about those. And so this form of communication, it can come across as being demanding or commanding. This is these really acts of independence. It's like, I deserve a pedicure every week. Maybe they're thinking that in their mind, or they're saying this, I deserve being treated like a lady. They may be mad they're not treated, that their husband's not chivalrous there, or that they're not
listening or caring.
Not showing the love that they really want. So they're doing this kind of behavior. And then on the opposite side, the men, they're like, I work hard, so I should be able to play hard. I'm going to buy me an ATV because I want it. Or I'm going to get this gun because I want it. Or I'm going to get this new, $1,000 set of golf clubs.
Or, and we're headed into a new topic, I'm going to take this fishing trip.
Right. Yes.
So we're going to go into something else here, which is other independent acts that are selfish, which is planning activities without your spouse's knowledge.
Right. So we talked about money. Now we're going to time. It's a spouse's time that's just being selfish with it.
Just don't misunderstand. Having a fishing trip with the buddies or a girls' night in of itself is not a bad thing. And many times those things are necessary and they really help to refuel us as people. However, it's the way you go about planning it and
communicating. Just like buying things for yourself is not a bad thing. It's a good thing to buy a new set of clothes. It's a good thing to go to buy, I don't know, something fun to play with. Just as she was saying, it's healthy for you to have this boys' night out or girls' night out.
So it's really important that discussion takes place. You don't want it to be done without prior approval of your spouse. Or another thing is, if you are having these girls' night outs or these fishing dates, fishing with the buddies dates, I'm sure men don't call it that.
We're a fishing date.
A fishing date. But if you're doing these things on a consistent basis, then you're sacrificing your family's time.
Right. You're not really taking them into consideration. You're
right.
not taking your children or your spouse into consideration.
Now, another thing to consider as well, and this is something I see as a therapist, is that one of the first things to go in a marital relationship is leisure time or recreational time. It's like one of the first things they sacrifice.
Right. They stop going out on dates.
They stop going on dates. They stop having family activities together. And it just seems like, well, it's not all that important. And it just flies right under the radar. And before you know it, the couple forgets how to have fun together.
Right.
And they stop connecting.
So it is very important to plan this time together where you get refueled, where you're with, well, definitely for young mothers and young fathers, it would be time that you're with adults instead of being with the kids the whole time, where you can get this re-energized, where you can have this emotional support by other healthy adults.
Right. So it's important that through these activities you're able to show your spouse that you care about him or her by actually participating in the activity rather than sulking and being passive aggressive. So when you do plan these activities, it's important that you're able to show your spouse that.
Now, here's the issue I found out with the leisure time or downtime. I'll find in my marriage counseling that there usually, when this is really an issue, there's one that takes too much. Like, they're doing too much leisure time outside of their marriage, and the other is not at all. Like, they're consumed with the kids, or always with their husband, or what they're not. And there's not a balance there. And so really there needs to be a balance there. And in a way, the person who is continually sacrificing, always with the kids, they need to be not selfish, but they really need to take care of themselves. And I find just as hard as it is for that one person to say, no, I got to go fishing, for them to not fish every week or not to watch football every whatever it may be, or not to go out with the girls every night, kind of thing. As much as it's a struggle for the person who is doing all this independent behavior, it's just as much a struggle for the person who is always sacrificing, always with the kids, to kind of let go and go take time for themselves.
Well, and that can be a pride issue as well, because they can be overly identifying with the role that they play in their family.
Yes.
And it's always good to remember that you can't draw from an empty well.
Right. Yeah. So you've got to it's healthy to have this downtime where you can refuel yourself. And for some people, that is kind of scary, I guess, for some to actually, because they get kind of, I don't know, maybe they get kind of.
This brings up a good topic, or a good thought. I'm thinking about how the American way is very different than many other European and maybe South American and other countries, where they have built-in family time and built-in vacations, where you can go to a European country and everybody's on vacation at the same time, or you've got your your siestas when you're
right.
South of the border, where in the middle of the day there's that downtime. But in the American way is working that somewhere between 40 and above hours a week. A lot of times for people it's 40, 60, 70 hours a week.
Right.
And there's not this built-in time that families, spend together, eating a meal together every day or anything like that. It's really up to us to build that time in.
Yeah, it's not valued as much.
Our culture does not value it as much as maybe some European, South American, maybe even African and other cultures do.
Yeah, I feel like our culture does encourage unhealthy
workaholism.
Balance. Yeah, workaholism. Yeah,
yes.
Balance of time or of downtime versus work time, or of rest versus work.
And what's happened is it's created this very, I'm going to use a word that doesn't really exist, unmindfulness, where people are unintentional with their time. So what they end up doing is they work all day, they slave all day to the the boss man, and then they get home in the evening and it's really easy to not think about that bag of potato chips you're eating and to binge watch Netflix and just completely you're like drooling and you're not even able to think. You're so tired from all the work you've done and you have nothing left to give your family.
Yeah, you're zapped of everything.
Yes.
And then what ends up happening is you are what we would call in counseling, you're emotionally distant from your family members when you get home from work. You're not engaging them. You're just sitting there vegging, watching TV or some kind of entertainment.
Yeah, not that entertainment's a bad thing, but like we said, I think our culture seems to promote a kind of lack of mindfulness.
Right.
And you do your job and you do it to excess and you burn yourself out.
So what we hope that you've learned from this is conversation in marriage should be something that is very intentional, thought out, something that is very purposeful, and for you to avoid this demanding or commanding behavior, you need to plan out these conversations with each other. It means talking to your spouse about, hey, let's get a balance in this area. What do you think that balance would look like? How can we work on that? Because I'm feeling this. I'm feeling like I'm really burnt out in this area. Or I feel like, maybe you need to take some more time in here. What do you think about that? That's just something I'm noticing. So it's healthy to have these conversations, these very intentional conversations where you're planning these conversations. Not that you're having these conversations like in the middle of a transition.
Or in crisis mode.
Or in crisis mode or something. But in a downtime, instead of watching that show on Netflix or from Amazon Prime or whatever it is, or YouTube, cutting that off and having a discussion about this to help get things more in balance.
And if that sounds too complicated or difficult for you, I would highly recommend finding a good Christian marriage therapist to help you determine how to create the right environment or atmosphere to have these conversations and what needs to be discussed, because it may be that you need help in mediating these conversations.
Yes.
Because like we said, these selfish acts accumulate over time, and there can be a lot of hurt and pain that make it very difficult to have these conversations. So it may be helpful to have a third party, not your family, not a friend, but someone who is not related to you or invested in relationship with you that can come alongside you and help you navigate these communication issues.
Right. And the place I recommend for people when they're looking for a counselor or therapist is looking for ones who are members of the AACC, so that's American Association of Christian Counselors. That's going to help you find someone that's going to be pretty well grounded in some healthy counseling if they're a member of the American Association of Christian Counselors. It's a large organization. It's where a bunch of these Christian groups came together, combined together a few years back. But you'll find a healthy counselor there. And, as I tell, don't be discouraged. Let's say you're already going to a counselor. Maybe that's not worked or that doesn't seem to be working. Well, go find another counselor. You just may not have one that works right for you. I've had many clients who, they may have been to 3 or 4 different ones, marriage counselors, before they come to me. You can work on your marriage.
That's interesting. Some people that struggle with saying no, they think that they have to settle for the counselor they have, but they don't have to.
No.
You determine who your counselor is going to be, and if they're not working, if they're not right for you, find somebody else. Don't lose heart in the process.
Right, and they just may not be right for you at that. I'm not saying whoever you were seeing or before was a bad counselor. They just may not have been right for you at that time. Mm-hmm. Go out. Find another counselor. My recommendation to my clients is, see if that's not right, go find another counselor. I also recommend them to go to group. I recommend them to go to, and when I mean group, it may be Celebrate Recovery if they're dealing with alcoholism, AA, or it may be if they've gone through a divorce, it'd be Divorce Care. If they're dealing with grief, go to Grief Share. And then I also recommend them, hey, go to these retreats. Go to like Focus on the Family's, I think is it Walk to Remember? So there's
Weekend to Remember.
I'm sorry. So like Weekend to Remember. Go to these different retreats. Go to that many marriage counselors throughout the nation, different ones have retreats. Go to those.
Or a marriage intensive.
That's great. I recommend that. I have my couples, I say, you're seeing me, but do all of it because I have ones come to me and they say, should I do this? I say, no. I say, do all of it. Of course, if you're really wanting to work on your marriage, you're going to do all of it. Don't just exclude this one or that one. I think all would be helpful. Now, of course, when you're doing that, you need to, as Scripture says, test the spirits. You may have somebody that may not be speaking so much the truth, or at least maybe they may be. I mean, there's people out there that may be unhealthy, counselors or whoever. But seek all of it. Let God use who God wants to use. Don't hold Him back.
Well, we hope that today's episode has been informative to you. We hope that you've been able to delve down deep and maybe look into some areas that have been difficult for you, and that hopefully you can work to replace maybe some negative ways that you communicate with some positive ways. And if you need practice and need a therapist, like we said, we highly recommend you seeking one out to help you in your marital difficulties.
Yeah, and we just encourage you in your marriage. You can have a healthy, thriving marriage, but it does take work.
Well, we hope that you've enjoyed our series on anger and marriage, and we look forward to the next episode.
Goodbye.
Thank you for joining us today on Relationship Helpers. It is our hope that you gained some valuable information. For the show notes and more information on today's topic, please visit www.relationshiphelpers.net. Again, that is www.relationshiphelpers.net. If you enjoyed our show, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review. If you had questions or concerns about our show, please let us know about this as well by going to our website, www.relationshiphelpers.net. Thanks again and have a blessed week. Note that accuracy and authority in regards to the subject matter covered today is not a replacement for professional care. Neither the host, the clinicians, or the guests are rendering clinical or other professional advice. Seek professional help if you need it.